Hi, everyone. Great to be here at Creando Enlaces, which is now in its 10th year. Congratulations to the committee planning all of these conferences. I've been here before as a participant, and this year I worked up the courage to try and be a presenter. So here I am. Let me go ahead and share my screen and see if we can get this show on the road here. So today I'm going to be talking about Circle of Stories on Zoom. I just want to make sure that it's showing up correctly. Are you seeing the presenter view or the regular view? Let me stop share super quick. Okay, that might be a little better. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Circle of Stories on Zoom, which is how we brought early learning to families during COVID-19 during the pandemic. Like I mentioned, my name is Sheridan Casares. I'm the Early Literacy Reading Program Specialist at the Long Beach Public Library. So the agenda for today, we'll be going over a little bit about us, some of the learning outcomes, story time, and sort of how we approached it, extension activities, planning and design, branding and promotion, evaluation, and finally a summary. Throughout most of the slides, you'll see a little blue rectangle in the bottom left-hand corner, and that kind of highlights some of the adaptations that we made to overcome the challenges created by the pandemic and the virtual format. So keep an eye on that box. That's kind of where I'm throwing in all of the different lived experience that we lived during this program. A little bit about us. I'm one half of this program. The other half is Antoinette Franceschi Chavez. She's my colleague. She is amazing, amazing, amazing. I cannot sing enough praises for her. She could not be here today, unfortunately, because she was blessed with a baby girl and is taking time to bond with her and be a great mom. So I'm going to be talking for the both of us, but know that I am just one half of this equation. She is the other half and probably the better half too. So moving right along here. Some of the learning outcomes for today's session are, we are hoping that you learn how to adapt early learning programs to reach remote or marginalized populations. During the pandemic, that shifted a little bit, right? All of a sudden, everybody had a little bit of something that they were dealing with. And we sort of tried to aim it a little bit exclusively as well to populations that were Spanish speakers, since we were promoting the program in a bilingual way. We want to analyze how the COVID-19 pandemic has shifted traditional early learning programs and how youth programmers can respond to those shifts. And we want to learn how to leverage creative, pedagogical, and that's mostly internet, and technical capacities to create virtual programming that is engaging. Now that we're rising out of the pandemic a little bit, who knows, this kind of thing seems a little bit maybe passé, but hopefully if we continue to do virtual programs for young children, you can learn some things and apply them at your own systems, at your own libraries. So Circle of Stories, Círculo de Cuentos, sprung as originally as a live story time on Zoom. It launched in April of 2021. And at that point, in Long Beach at least, we were mainly doing pre-recorded story times. And families were giving us feedback that they missed the in-person interaction and the dialogue that typically goes along with an in-person story time. We decided to try and take a crack at doing that in a virtual format, and then decided that Zoom would be the platform that was probably the most apropos for us to use to do this. As part of this, so we wanted to make sure that the families had all of the materials that they would need to participate in a story time in a way that was rich and engaging and educational and recreational. And so we created these Círculo de Cuentos, Circle of Stories kits that included an activity guide and 2 sets of manipulatives for rhythm sticks, shakers, scarves, pretty much anything that they might need during a story time. So Circle of Stories had 5 cohorts. We had 2 in English and 2 in Spanish, and then 1 in person that we did later that was a completely bilingual Circle of Stories. It was funded by the Bringing the Library to You Early Learning Grant from the California State Library, and also part of our Dive into Reading initiative here at the Long Beach Public Library, which is our version of 1,000 books before kindergarten. So we planned the story times around early learning skills, which is a little bit different than you might normally plan a story time. Typically, you would choose a theme, right? Dinosaurs or food or emotions, but we chose developmental areas. So for example, here you can see some of the activity guide contents for the movement story time. We provided the families with all of the lyrics to the songs or finger plays that we were doing. We let them know which manipulatives they were going to need that particular week, the books that we were going to read, and each one of them was centered around that particular early learning skill. Each story time incorporated at least 2 of the manipulatives in the kit, and we would let them know sort of how to use them, and then we would actually do the songs and stuff on Zoom. And then Antoinette provided caregiver asides, skill building strategies, and extension activities. Each of the weeks within the activity kit came with that particular week's songs and rhymes, and then on the facing page was extension activities to try at home that would strengthen those particular skills that we covered that week in story time. So the families had something to do sort of with us in the session, and then they had a little bit of follow-up, you know, at their own time, at their own pace, at home with materials that they would normally be found at home. Some of the things that we learned through the pandemic was that we had to basically spend money to distribute these materials to families, because these are materials that they would normally find in story time, but maybe they didn't have at home just yet. We started using the Zoom Spotlight feature for books while we were reading a book, or for flannels and for finger plays. And then we decided that little by little, we started picking up on the fact that the lens of the camera on whatever device we were using was our friend. It wasn't a limitation. So we started playing around with switching the lens. For example, we might have thrown the flannel board but on the back-facing lens of the tablet. And then while we decided to do the flannel board, we would switch the lens out so they would have a much better view, a closer view of the different flannel pieces that we were working with that day. Or we might cover the lens super quick or turn off the camera and then move our hand or turn it back on and say, what's missing on the flannel board? Or, you know, did somebody go away? Or what shape do you see now? And so we sort of started using that to build suspense or to create engagement or sort of get the attention of the children and the caregivers in the middle of the story time. The extension activities that were provided through Circle of Stories were sort of an attempt to allow the parents a little bit of an idea on how to strengthen those skills at home. Typically, I think that we assume that, you know, parents bring their family to story time, and then in story time, we do a lot of work and we do a lot of learning and we have a lot of fun. And then as soon as they leave, it's kind of like, well, back to normal. We provided them with big tabloid-sized sheets. You can see them sort of there on the bottom right, that were practice using scissors. They were practice scribbling. They were shapes that they can cut out and then reposition into patterns or create tangrams, a bunch of different things. And then Antoinette also provided a ton of skill building suggestions. For example, she let the families know that if the scissors that we provided in the kits were a little too big, the caregivers could wrap masking tape around the handles to create a more chubby handle so that the kids would be able to use it with their smaller fingers. A ton of different little adaptations that normally people don't think about, but she, with her teacher background, was able to sort of bring into the program and relay that wisdom to the parents. We also, like I mentioned before, provided practice sheets and guidance on how to recreate those practice sheets at home. And then we stressed to Spanish-speaking caregivers as well that learning can happen in any language, and specifically in their home language. English will come later. So all of the different things that we provided were in both languages, and we wanted to make sure that the caregivers knew that whatever language they were transmitting to their children was an appropriate language to learn in, to live in, to breathe in, to exist in, right? English will come later when they enter school, but for now, you know, provide them with whatever worldview you have, because that's the most important thing for you as a parent, as a caregiver. So the planning and design of the program, like I mentioned before, it was kind of a normal story time. We had strategic asides for caregivers within the program itself. We had explanations around the text selections, which started to become a more important part of the program as the cohorts went on. We would stop in the middle of a story, for example, and explain specifically why we chose that particular book, whether it was richness of language, whether it was in Spanish, la melodía, the melody of the language, or maybe a weird verb, right? You might come across sort of like comer, parar, saltar, but maybe you don't come across the verb croar, to croak, very often, right? So we would explain different aspects of the language, of the text that we chose, to show them how to identify texts that were rich while they came to the library to pick up books, or, you know, when they would come back to the library. We also had ideas for manipulatives in other contexts. For example, the rhythm sticks we talked about, in story time, we would bang them together during the songs, but then we let them know, these could also work, later on when you're play acting a drum set, or when you decide to do a little bedtime routine and you use the rhythm sticks to calm your child down. Let's do it softly. Let's do it loudly. Let's do it, so there's a number of different ways of doing that. Each manipulative kit included enough for 2 participants. We were hoping to encourage the caregiver-child dyad, right? We wanted the caregiver to interact as well and have a set of the things to interact with. Or if the child had a sibling, we wanted them to be able to take part in the program as well. Because all of this sprung up in the middle of the pandemic, we wanted to make sure that we were really intentional about transitions and routines. A lot of the children that were participating in Circle of Stories had never really been to a story time before. Many of them, didn't really have a chance to attend before all our libraries closed. So they had never sort of understood the norms of story time. And so we were hoping to transmit that across a screen, which was a tall order. We often failed, but we did our best. We wanted to honor the fact as well that participants allowed us into their homes. It was one of those things where we wanted to make sure that the caregivers knew, hey, we're not judging. If you have a mess on the floor because it's 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning, that's what it is. We're just here to read some books, sing some songs, have a good time, and sort of provide a little bit of early learning support to you and your family today. We wanted as well personal greetings for attendees. We would ask the attendees to rename themselves every morning on Zoom to their child's name, and then through that, we would personally greet each of the children in the room to make sure that they were seen, that they felt heard, that they felt like somebody was watching them and seeing them and identifying them. And it's also kind of an informal community building, right? So that was really important as well. Typically, you don't always necessarily do that in an in-person story time, but in this particular Circle of Stories, we wanted to make sure that we identified everybody in the room and made them feel welcome and made them feel a part of it. We also wanted to make sure that we were reassuring caregivers about where they are developmentally, emotionally, cognitively, physically, and that we were all experiencing something that was a little bit out of the norm, or a lot of it out of the norm, and that it was okay. We didn't have expectations for them to be experts in any of these arenas, and we didn't have expectations for them to know the rhymes or know the songs or know the books. That was our job. Our job was to bring to them a little bit of something, share it with them, and hope that they enjoyed it, right? So we tried to bring the stakes down a lot for this, and it worked out really well for the caregivers that were in attendance. Some of the branding and the promotion on Zoom and even just throughout was, you can see here the different ways that we sort of created a branded look for the story time or for Circle of Stories. We really wanted to set it apart from the other story times that were happening at the time in our library, primarily because those were pre-recorded and there was at the time only one bilingual thing going on. So we created a whole new logo for it, a whole new color scheme. We chose fonts, and then that sort of logo and look was then applied to all of the promotional materials on social media, the Eventbrite, the actual activity guide, and pretty much anything that we produced as part of this had that same look, that same feel, and then little by little families started to recognize it. This sort of allowed us also to send out these materials with our community partners as a sort of package deal, right? So some of our partnerships with Latinos in Action, one of the organizations nearby, or even with certain community kind of activists, there was one that was really supportive named Elizabeth Gonzalez, helped us promote the program. The next thing that I'm going to say might seem a little bit antithetical to our ethos in public libraries, but we saved places for underserved populations. I know that typically it's all about equal access, but we wanted to make sure that Latinos and Spanish speakers had a place in Circle of Stories. And so what we did was we created spots on Eventbrite that had a limit of 15 per session, but really we had actually 20 spots. And we would use our community partnerships to fill those spots with members from the community that we knew either needed this kind of engagement on Zoom or would be interested in it, whether it was in Spanish or in English. We also cross-promoted with another program at the Long Beach Public Library called Cáigale al Zoom. If you missed Ana Villalpando's session, just the previous session below, go watch the recording. She's amazing and was doing great work. And so that launched in January. And we decided to promote this, which was launching in April, at that established program. And many of those community members told their, oh, I have a sister who has a little kid. I have a cousin who's got a 2-year-old. I'll tell them, and then before long, we had those spots that we had reserved for those populations completely filled up, and they joined us and they enjoyed the program. Let me see here. So evaluation. Over the course of the program, we had 4 cohorts and then 1 in-person cohort. Total, we had 286 attendees. And then after individual sessions, Antoinette and I would get together and we would say what worked, what didn't work. I thought that rhyme really was going to work, but it fell completely flat. So we would try to rework things and think about them, right? That was individual sessions. And then also between cohorts. Because these were already printed out and distributed in the community, we couldn't change too much in between cohorts, or sorry, in the middle of a cohort. But in between cohorts, we reworked some of the rhymes, selected new materials, new books, new texts, and then recreated the activity guide for the following cohort in a way that we thought would work a little better. There was some trusted caregivers that were part of Circle of Stories that we would ask for feedback individually. And we got to know them really well. So they let us know about sound problems on Zoom. I think one of the first things that we did is both of us had our mics on at the same time and we were at opposite ends of the room. So there was a lag and it made it hard to follow with the song. So we started muting, one or the other. And then we also learned that they would have liked more book recommendations. So in the middle of the first cohort, Antoinette and I started emailing out in the middle of the week ahead of the following session, books that would support the previous week's curricula. So she would provide them with book recommendations, or here's a CD that's really great and has awesome songs. Here's some websites that might be of interest to you. We also promoted our program Ready Rosie at the Long Beach Public Library with those emails. And we started to really build sort of these one-on-one relationships with parents that were dialogical. They would email us right back and say, oh my God, I love that book. Or, you know what, that book was a little advanced for my child, but my older kid really liked it. So it was very, we became friends, which, maybe sounds a little bit out there, but we became friends with the families and they would recognize us later on when we opened up again and they came to the library in person. Some of the stuff that we learned about here through feedback was to think about the output device for families. It was obvious to us that some of the families were watching Circle of Stories on like a big screen TV that was Wi-Fi enabled, so they could just load up Zoom and then there it was. Other families were watching it on their phone. Other families were participating on their iPad. So that sort of made us think about whether or not we were holding our hands closer to the camera to show finger plays or whether or not we were back here. And it started to influence the way that we would use the lens and the mic on our own devices. Like I mentioned before, we kept in touch between sessions, recommending books and activities. And, later on, even if it was something that was unrelated to Circle of Stories, they already had our emails and they would email us, hey, I'm looking for a book on spaghetti for my 3-year-old. What do you got? And we were able to sort of carry out reference transactions and interactions over email and then have the books ready for them when they wanted to pick them up at the library. You can see there some of the survey feedback on the right. I'll let you read that on your own. But for the most part, you can see there that some of the outcomes of the program were that we were hoping that they enjoyed the program, that they learned about new materials to read with their kids or sing with their kids. And the main thing was, for us at least, was to give them insight into how we as professionals, whether it's a library professional or a teacher, select materials to use in our programs. You can see 85% of them gained a lot of insight. There was a 15% sector that seemed a little bit unhappy with the program, but we'll leave that where it is. And so basically, over the course of the four story times and then the caregiver workshop, we really sort of drove home how we select materials for use in story times and other early learning programs, so that they would then also have the same knowledge when they came in with their children on their own on how to select materials that were rich in language, that provided phonological awareness, that were concept heavy, or that were engaging and fun. So let's see here, moving on to, so in summary, this is the 3 learning outcomes that we covered at the very beginning. I've got here the different things that touch on those. I guess I can go over them really quickly. We created the sort of kit model right during the pandemic, which was very popular, to provide families with everything that they would need for the program from home. We used our community partnerships to promote our program and to sort of fill those spots that we had saved. for members of underserved communities. We cross-promoted nascent programs at established programs in hopes of driving traffic. And so that was how we adapted our early learning programs to reach remote or marginalized populations. The COVID-19 pandemic shifted, early learning programs by quite a bit because we weren't doing in-person anymore, which seems so crucial for that early age. But we provided guidance on how to create materials at home for early learning. We stressed that that learning can happen in any language, not just the dominant language. We reassured caregivers about where they found themselves and where their children found themselves. And then by keeping in touch with families in between sessions, we sort of broke that, what I'm calling, quote unquote, the organization barrier. All of us are agents of an organization, but these families got to know us first, myself and Antoinette, and then through us got to know the organization as opposed to the other way around. Typically, we shield ourselves. I work at the library, but you don't really get to know me. You get to know the professional who works at the library, or you get to know the library first, and then you get to know me a little bit. We tried to turn that on its head to create confianza, to create, a feeling of camaraderie. They let us into their homes. Why shouldn't they get to know who we are? And then through us, they got to know the library better and became library users. So that was something that was crucial for me. As far as the creative, pedagogical, and technical capacities, we use the camera's lens creatively. So don't be scared to switch the camera lens in the middle of a story time if you want to show something different, or to cover it up and speak, something else, or turn it off or return it back on. It's a tool and we should be able to use it. We want to think about the output device that families are using, use the Zoom Spotlight feature, and then reflect, reflect in between sessions, in between cohorts, if it is that you're doing a cohort model, but constantly be reflecting, fine-tuning, all that stuff. So I think that brings us to the end. There's my contact information. Feel free to email me. I'm more than happy to share the PDFs of the activity guides so that you can print them out and leaf them through. There's my phone number as well. And then just a quick little plug for a personal project with my colleague Luisa. We're hoping to launch a website very soon called bibliocuentos.com, where we're going to upload all of our original songs and rhymes that we've either translated from English into Spanish or from Spanish into English. So keep an eye on for that. That should be early June or so. But anything related to this, feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to share materials or, just chat even, really. I'm always looking for new library friends. So yeah, that's the end of it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sheridan. That was wonderful. We have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
One is to share your slides.
Yes, I can definitely share my slides. I can definitely share my slides either through the Creando platform, or if you want to email me directly, Amy, I'll put up my contact info one more time, or I'll put it in the chat.
Sheridan, you can share your slides with the Creando committee, and we can make sure those get uploaded with the recordings on the website.
Beautiful. Okay.
Okay, our next question is, how long were these virtual programs? This is from Orquídea from San Diego County Library, and she asks because she quickly learned how short kids' attention spans are for virtual activities.
I think, if I remember correctly, the original intent was for them to be 30 minutes. But we quickly learned that 30 minutes was a little bit long. And so we tried to compress them a little bit down into about 20 to 25. And that included also, like pauses in the middle of a book, or we might have brought the book a little bit closer to the camera to show, an illustration. And so we tried to really slow the program down. Oftentimes, despite the fact that we had planned, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 different rhymes or finger plays, we would actually only do 3 or 4 and repeat them so that we wouldn't have the families sort of disengage. It's really hard to be dynamic on a screen, so that was also a challenge. Yeah.
Okay, our next question. How do you see this evolving as in-person programs begin again? And do you think you will still continue Zoom story times as an offering?
Thank you, Karen. This particular program we actually did in person just in March. And it went really, really well because we were able to provide the families with the activity guides, the kits, and then the sort of in-person like transmittal of, hey, look, this is a really great activity to do at home. We could describe it a little bit easier. And so it went really well in person, especially, you know, families will see like, oh, they're giving away kits. Let's flock to it, right? So that worked out really well too. So this could definitely become an in-person program that's a regular feature at the Long Beach Public Library. As far as the Zoom story times go, I think we would be more than happy to, but I'm not sure that families, we've started finding that our attendance for virtual programs is starting to wane. I think people are a little bit fatigued. So maybe, you know, in a year or so after people are a little bit more screen willing, we'll launch it again on Zoom. That might be a good feature for us too.
Okay, our next question. Did you ever experience feeling like you were just entertainment for the kids if parents walked away or were disengaged? This can happen in person at traditional story times as well.
Yes, there was one family that the caregiver would kind of just set up the iPad and then you could kind of hear them in the back like cooking or something. And so we just kind of asked them, hey, you know, we really provided you with 2 sets of the manipulative so that you could really participate in this, you know, in the program, and it'd be of value for your little one, you know, if you were there and did that kind of thing. I think we tried to address it in a way that was very much like, you know, it's really for you. And so I think by the 3rd week, they kind of were like, oh, you know, they joined, and then they found that they liked it. And so after that, it wasn't an issue at all. But yeah, that happened once or twice, and then we just kind of addressed it directly. We had all their phone numbers, we had their emails, so we were very much in constant contact with the families that were part of Circle of Stories, Círculo de Cuentos.
Next question. How do you sustain funding for the kits for in-person programs? Is this now incorporated with your general fund allocations, or are you receiving external support through grants or other sources?
For this particular program, we had a nice amount of grant funds. So we bought enough materials to, I think, do 5 cohorts. And since we've only done 3, we still have another materials for another 2 cohorts. But then we also, you know, our library, like any library, is constantly on the hamster wheel of grant funding. So we apply for a grant, we do the grant work, we prove that we did it, and then we're already applying for the next one to continue to do the programs that we launched with that original grant. So we're in the process right now of applying for another grant, but because we have the materials, we're able to do this for another couple of times before we necessarily, like, you know, we're really stressed about where the money is going to come from. The good thing is as well is that these materials are not super expensive. And one of the things that you can do if you're worried about stretching a materials budget is, instead of providing them with 2 sets of each manipulative, just give them 1 and explain to them that this is something that, you know, we want to share with them, but we don't necessarily have the funds for. So great question. Thank you, Eddie.
And going along with that, did the parents have to check out the kit, or the bags are a giveaway?
The bags were a giveaway specifically because we wanted to make sure that we were trying to be, you know, it was in the middle of the pandemic and we didn't necessarily want to have to deal with returns and, you know, things that people had handled a lot and maybe hadn't washed their hands, or, you know, who knows. So we made them giveaways also so that the families would be able to keep them after the program and continue, you know, doing the songs and rhymes from the activity guide that they enjoyed. We also made sure to let them know, hey, look, if your child outgrows this kit, pass it on to either to the younger child that you have, or to the neighbor, or to La Prima, or, you know, whoever. Like, there's always somebody who has a baby in your life. So pass it along and show them a couple of the songs to sort of keep that train rolling, right? It's been really cute too, because as we opened again in person, we actually saw a lot of the kids that were part of Circle of Stories come into the library with their little backpack on, completely ready for story time. Both because they had the materials, but also because they had learned some of the storytime norms on Circle of Stories, and then they were ready to participate when, you know, in person when they finally came back.
So are you using some of the same materials as you're doing in person now? The same songs, so they recognize them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was, definitely for the Circle of Stories program that was in person, we were using a lot of the same curricula. But then these aren't, I mean, I would hope that you all understand that these aren't like groundbreaking songs. Like we did Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes, right? It was, the popcorn song with the scarves, it wasn't anything that was completely like so original that in an obscure that you would never find it. It was stuff that was, regular storytime conventions. So that later on when they came back to in-person story times, they would be able to recognize the songs that we had sung in Circle of Stories and feel like they were a part of it, that they were already storytime pros. And it's been really cool to see the kids sort of develop and bloom a little bit because they recognize and they feel like they're good at story time, which is not something that we necessarily thought about. And I don't think we necessarily think about all the time, but it's important to make members of the public feel like they're good at using the public library because then they come back, they feel welcome in the space. They feel like they're good at it. They feel like they're proficient and they're excited to come back and learn one little new thing, the next story time session.
Also, what was your time commitment when you were creating this?
So the actual creation of the curriculum took a while because we had to be really careful about selecting materials. We would test oftentimes, like we might have selected a picture book that worked really well for movement, but then when we held it up to the lens, we found that the illustrations were a little too small and it wouldn't work on a virtual format. So we were constantly testing the text that we would select and then the different finger plays that we were doing on Zoom before we actually included them in the activity guide. So that took a long time. But once we had the activity guide, putting together the kits was pretty quick. And then the actual running of the program, since we had 2 cohorts going on at the same time, we would do Circle of Stories English like Saturdays at 10 a.m. That would go till about 10:30. And then Circle of Stories Círculo de Cuentos en Español would start at like, let's say 11. And then that would go till about 11:30 and then clean up. So we were spending probably a couple of hours every Saturday morning running the program itself. And that was in between sort of kit distribution and promotion and, all the other things. So it was kind of time intensive for the both of us, but the outcomes were worth it. And the fact that the families recognized us later were worth it. It's all part of the game. So it worked out.
Would you say you're pretty tech savvy when you started this whole creation of the program?
Yeah, at that point, the pandemic had been going for over a year. So all of us were super well versed in Zoom. There were some of the families that weren't, so we just kind of tried to coach them a little bit. But for the most part, yeah, the tech part went pretty smoothly. It was more, at least for us, the hiccups ended up becoming trying to transmit some like a physical object through a screen, through another screen to engage a little one. That was really the difficult part because it seems like it had to go through 4 different layers before it got out to the intended audience. So we had to learn a lot in that respect, but the actual tech part of the Zoom was pretty easy. We included as well in the inside front cover of every activity guide, a QR code, so they could just join the Zoom room directly from there, and the meeting code, in hopes to make it as easy as possible for families to join us every Saturday morning.
Any other questions anyone would like to ask? Or Sheridan, do you want to add anything?
I just want to say that, like, even though, here I am presenting about this program, it's not anything that's super impossible. It was just a story time with extra asides for caregivers, some activity guides, which, we printed these in-house. It's just tabloid sized paper, folded in half and stapled along the spine. And if you're inspired to do it, email me and I'll be more than happy to share anything that I can with you to help you succeed. Because a success for one of us is a success for all of us, really,
There's one more question. Are the QR codes used regularly?
That was kind of an interesting point. It seemed like all of the English users sort of were able to like save the link in their email and just click it whenever they needed it. But we found that the Spanish speakers that were using either their phones or their tablets would use use the QR codes a lot more readily because it was something that they kind of just would put in front of the camera and then it would, you know, pop up with the Zoom meeting. And I'm not sure if that was, I think that's probably more of like a tech literacy thing. So yeah, the Spanish speakers would use the QR codes more regularly, and then the English speakers that could manage email would use the links that we would send out over email more easily.
Are any of your Circle of Story Zoom presentations recorded anywhere?
We opted to not record them because it seemed like one of those things where we wanted to provide the families with a sort of safe environment to be themselves. And we didn't want to make them feel like they had to clean up their living room, you know, because it was going to be recorded, or that their child had to be really, you know, paying attention and really engaged because it was going to be recorded, or that they as parents had to be, you know, super on point as parents. We wanted to make it feel like something that was a little, you know, a circle of stories, basically. You know, it's just a little circle. It's just 10 of us here in the Zoom room, or 15 of us, or whatever it was. And we're just gonna do this, you know, it's just for us. And so we opted to not record anything. Also just for privacy concerns, we didn't want any children's faces being out there or their names. So yeah, so there's no recordings, which, you know, between you and I mean, everybody here, I think all the best stuff happens when nobody's recording, you know, everybody has more fun. So that was the reason why we chose to not record.
Minerva is asking what's included in the kit bag.
So each kit came with 2 sets of rhythm sticks. We also included a couple of instruments. Pretty much all of them had a maraca, and then these are bells, but they also had tambourines, or the little like kind of clicky tambourines. I'm not sure what their actual name is. 2 egg shakers. We had these wrist ribbons that the kids would either put on their wrist or they would hold, and then they would sort of like flutter them about. 2 colors of those. We had this comment ball, which was really, really cool. We used it during the movement story time, so the kids could throw it around their living room or up in the air. And then we also provided them with scarves. So 2 colors of scarves. I didn't include it in this one, but there was also glue sticks and some kid-friendly scissors, so they could work some of the other activity sheets, like the cutting one or the one where they had to cut out the shapes and put them into patterns. Inside also was the activity guides, which was, I don't know, like 12 pages worth of curriculum that we developed for the program. And then in the very back was a page that was about resources at the public library to continue to learn at home. So there was, for example, Ready Rosie, Canopy Kids, Tumble Book Library, and then Dive into Reading, which was our early literacy program that we have. That's our version of 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten. So we hoped that the kits would be sort of like a, you know, just like everything you might need in a backpack to do the program. But then also, like, let's say that you're in line at the grocery store and you want to sing a little rhythm stick song with your kids so that they're, you know, a little bit engaged and not bored in line at the grocery store. So we tried to create a kit that was, you know, a little bit of a one-stop shop. Looking back on it now, I wish we would have included crayons, but, you know, that'll be for the next one.
Christine asks, can we access the activity guide?
Yes, I have those files. If you want to email me, Christine, I'm going to put my email in the chat here and I'll just send them directly to you. I have them as printables that are going to print double-sided to fold into a booklet. So it's not necessarily something that's like going to make sense to you if you're reading it from top to bottom. But all of the different pages go together to form a double page spread for that particular week's early learning concept, if that makes sense. But email me, I'm more than happy to share them with you. I have them in English and I have them in Spanish as well.
Any other questions anyone has? Well, thank you so much, Sheridan. That was all wonderful information. Very inspiring. You're getting a lot of accolades in chat.
Thank you everyone so much for being here. Thank you, Creando Committee, for accepting my proposal.